Alan, 38 years old, is a successful businessman who owns a large company respected by everyone in the industry. With a solid career, a luxurious home, expensive cars, and a comfortable life, he has everything many men dream of. Yet when night falls and silence envelops him, Alan feels an emptiness he can hardly describe. It seems there's a hidden corner of his soul that remains a void, unable to be filled, a persistent shadow he cannot dispel. His wife, whom he had loved since his youth, has left him forever, leaving behind a space that nothing can fill. All that remains is him and his young daughter, the girl he tries his best to protect and love in the way his wife once did. But perhaps she too is searching to piece together what was lost. His wife, named Riley, was the love of his life. They met as children during golden summer afternoons when their families decided to live close to each other. Growing up amidst joyful conversations and playful games, their affection naturally blossomed. No one could have predicted that between hasty study sessions and endless fun, their love would grow, like inseparable childhood friends. Though both families were well matched, their love didn't rely on that fact. It was a genuine love, unbound by social status, just a bond between two people who had shared life's journey together through the years. They attended the same school and later went abroad together for their studies. These trips weren't just brief summer vacations, but important milestones in their lives. They shared not only joys, but also worries, dreams, and youthful aspirations. And then, as if by nature, they decided to commit to each other for life, building their own happy little family. Their love was as beautiful as a perfect painting, flawless, where the warm colors of trust and sincerity touched every corner of life. But then everything changed. Riley passed away suddenly from an illness that even doctors couldn't cure, leaving a vast emptiness in Alan's life, a pain that would never fade. Though his young daughter still doesn't fully understand this loss, she is gradually realizing that her mother is no longer here. Every night, when she asks about her mother, Alan can only hold her tightly, trying to hold back the tears he cannot shed. Now, with his successes, Alan realizes that all he has is just material wealth, while the most important things, love and connection, have gone forever. He tries to find meaning in his work, in new projects, but everything feels dull in his mind. Perhaps his true happiness was left behind in those joyful days with Riley, when they were building a future together, when he could see her smile every morning and feel the love in her gaze. Now, all that remains are memories of a beautiful love and a silent home, where memories flood back every time he sees old photos, every time he recalls the stories his wife used to tell. Stories full of hope and dreams. Today, after a long, stressful day at work, Alan drives home feeling heavy-hearted. Along the way, he stops by a flower shop and chooses a bouquet of deep red roses. Flowers that seem to symbolize the memories of his wife Riley, who was taken too soon. When he reaches the cemetery, the sky is gray, and the cold wind seems to bid farewell to the departed. Alan walks to Riley's grave, who had passed from an incurable illness. Her name is engraved on the cold stone, next to the fresh bouquet he places down. "I miss you so much, my love," he whispers through his tears. His voice is like a belated apology, each word tinged with an unerasable regret. Alan stands there, in emptiness and silence, searching for comfort but finding only pain. After some time at the cemetery, Alan returns home. When he opens the door, Nora runs to him with a joyful shout. "Daddy's home!" She rushes to him and hugs him tightly, her happiness undeniable. Alan lifts her and spins her in the air, just as he used to do with her mother. His eyes well up with tears, both joyous and sorrowful. "How are you, my princess?" he asks, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "I'm great. Mila and I just built a castle out of wooden blocks." Nora replies cheerfully, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the playroom. In the playroom, colorful drawings decorated the walls, and Nora seemed very proud of the castle she had just built. Alan knelt to look at it, and his heart warmed with that simple joy. That evening, they played and laughed together. For dinner, they enjoyed roasted chicken and salad prepared by Mila. Afterward, Alan read Nora a bedtime story. She quickly fell asleep in his arms, while Alan held her close, gently stroking her soft hair and whispering, "I love you, my little one." That night was painful for Alan. He lay in bed, unable to sleep, as memories of the past flooded back. Every moment he had spent with Riley seemed so vivid, as if it had happened just yesterday. He missed her laughter, her gentle touch, and the way she took care of both him and their daughter. The morning began like any other. Alan woke up early, just before dawn as usual, needing time to prepare for the day ahead. With Nora still asleep, he enjoyed a hot cup of coffee in the kitchen. His thoughts drifted between last night and the upcoming work meeting. He left the house carrying his briefcase and paused by his car on the way to the office. Looking up at the gray sky, he remembered the days when life felt less heavy. Now every morning was filled with anticipation and worry. That morning, Alan arrived at the company as usual. The weariness from the previous night still lingered within him, but work was always an essential part of his life. Today, there was a significant change in his team. Hazel, his new assistant, was replacing Scarlett, who had decided to leave after 9 years together. As Alan entered his office, Hazel was already there. The young woman, attractive, with long flowing hair and sharp features, was standing and waiting for him. Though she was beautiful, Hazel's overly confident and somewhat insincere demeanor made Alan feel slightly uneasy. However, looking at her resume, he had to admit that she was quite qualified. Perhaps for that reason alone, Alan decided to give her a chance. "Hello, Hazel, I'm Alan," he began, trying to keep a professional tone. "You've probably heard about Scarlett. She worked with me for 9 years, so I hope you'll adapt quickly and do well in the role." Hazel smiled, her gaze full of confidence. "Hello, Alan. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to work here. Scarlett is a very talented person, and I'll do my best not to disappoint you." Alan nodded, feeling a bit uneasy. "Do you have experience with large projects? This company is quite busy, so I expect you to handle the work efficiently." "I have worked with many companies before, Alan," Hazel replied, her voice sweet but firm. "I'm confident I can help you handle everything." Alan looked at her for a moment, feeling a bit uncomfortable with Hazel's overly confident attitude, but he didn't want to show too much. "Good. Then today you can start by organizing my schedule for this week. I have an important meeting on Thursday, and I need you to prepare the documents beforehand." "I'll take care of it right away, Alan," Hazel said, still smiling, but her eyes had an undeniable determination. Alan felt he needed to observe this new assistant more closely. While she seemed pleasant and energetic, what she could truly do was still a big question mark. In the following days, Hazel quickly proved her abilities. She was not only a new assistant, but also a capable, hard-working individual, always ready to tackle challenges. Alan began to notice a clear difference in the way Hazel worked, something he hadn't been able to imagine before.
One morning, Hazel walked into Alan's office with a confident smile. "Alan, I've prepared the documents for this afternoon's meeting with the external partners. I believe we can negotiate successfully with them."
Alan looked up from the pile of papers on his desk and glanced at her. "Good. You've done a good job with the preparations. But I want you to be cautious with this partner. They're difficult and have many demands." Hazel didn't seem fazed at all. She smiled and replied, "I've done thorough research on them, Alan. I'm confident I can secure the deal." And indeed, she did. When the meeting took place, Hazel displayed excellent negotiating skills, impressing the partners. She handled every situation tactfully, quickly convincing them of the terms that were beneficial to Alan's company. When the meeting ended, Alan looked at Hazel with a different expression. He hadn't expected her to bring in such significant contracts in such a short time. "I have to admit, you did very well," he said, sounding somewhat surprised. "This is a major step forward for the company." Hazel looked at him, her gaze determined. "Thank you, Alan. I'm happy I could contribute to the company. We'll be able to do even more." In the afternoon, when the workday had ended, Hazel smiled and suggested, "Alan, I know a great new restaurant. I think you'll like it. Let me treat you to dinner to relax after a busy day." Alan looked at her, then gently shook his head. "Thank you, Hazel, but I have to go home to Nora. She's still at home, and I don't want to leave her alone for too long." Hazel didn't show disappointment, but she could sense something in Alan's eyes. She smiled faintly and nodded in understanding. "Well then, go ahead. I'm sure she needs you more than a dinner." Alan thanked her and left the company. At that moment, Nora's image flashed in his mind. She had always been the reason he couldn't miss a moment by her side. It had been nearly 6 years since his wife passed, and despite the constant busyness of his work, he always made time for his daughter. When Alan returned home, the familiar scene appeared once again. Nora was playing with her toys in the living room, with Mila, the helper who had been with her since birth, by her side. Although Mila couldn't speak, she always found ways to communicate through eye contact and gestures, making Nora happy and able to understand. Thanks to this, Alan felt at ease leaving her with Mila. Mila was a young woman, only 25 years old, but with a traditional beauty that was captivating. She had fair skin, smooth black hair, and bright eyes that always radiated gentleness and kindness. Although she was young, Mila was very skilled in household chores. She cooked well and kept everything in the house tidy. However, there was one special thing about her that few people knew. Mila could not speak. She had been mute since childhood and was unable to utter a single word. This silence caused her to retreat further into her world, never daring to open up to anyone. When she began living with Alan and little Nora, Mila felt like she had found a real home. Though her job was just as a helper, to her, this wasn't just a workplace. It was a family, a place where she could feel the warmth she had lacked her whole life. Alan was a kind man, and despite his busy work schedule, he always treated her and Nora with kindness. This feeling gradually became something special in Mila's heart. After 6 years of living under the same roof, Mila could not ignore the deep feeling she had developed for Alan. She had fallen in love with her employer, but her heart was filled with worry and turmoil. Mila understood her place in life. She was just a maid, nothing more than someone who did housework, and she couldn't communicate like others due to her muteness. She knew that her feelings for Alan were impossible, as he was so different, so much higher in status than her. Every time she saw Alan playing with Nora, her heart would tighten. She silently admired the love and care he gave to his daughter. Every time he spoke to her, every smile he gave Nora, she felt a deep sadness in her heart. But at the same time, she also felt an intense admiration. Mila could not express her feelings, could not speak the words her heart longed to say. She could only quietly work, taking care of the whole family, and always silently watching Alan with loving eyes. Every time Alan smiled, every time he asked her about a dish or household chores, Mila felt a gentle joy seep into her heart. Even though she knew those were fleeting moments she could never change. After dinner, Alan sat next to Nora on a large armchair, holding a small book, and began reading to her. His voice was soft and warm, like a gentle lullaby, making the surroundings feel peaceful. Nora sat close by, her big eyes following each page of the book. Suddenly she looked up, gazing straight at her father, and spoke in a steady but very serious tone. "Dad, if you feel too lonely, you could go on a date with someone." Alan stopped, surprised, and looked at his daughter. Nora's question made his heart tighten, not because he was surprised by her sincerity, but because of the maturity in her words. A little girl, only 6 years old, who could think so deeply. "What do you mean, Nora?" Alan gently put the book down and turned to look at her. "You don't want me to live alone anymore." Nora nodded, her innocent eyes looking at him with full trust. "I know you need to be loved. You shouldn't be alone forever. I won't be selfish. I want you to be happy." Alan felt a warm wave wash over his heart. He looked at his daughter, his eyes becoming misty, unable to hide his emotions. He placed his hand on Nora's shoulder, a gesture both comforting and appreciative. "You're such a wonderful girl, Nora. I know you care about me, but I'm not lonely. I have you, sweetheart. You'll always be here with me." As night fell, Alan lay on his familiar bed, the soft light filtering through the window and casting shadows on the white wall. Nora's words still echoed in his mind, each sentence, each word, like a reminder. The little girl, only 6 years old, had already been able to see through the loneliness that he had tried to hide for so long. He closed his eyes, letting memories of Riley flood his thoughts. The sense of loss always ached within him whenever he thought of her. The moments with Riley, the smiles, the warm hugs, they were all so vivid, as if it had been just yesterday. But then he thought of Nora. The clear eyes of the little girl, her genuine concern made him realize that he couldn't keep living in the shadow of the past. Feelings of guilt and weakness welled up inside him. How could he continue to neglect himself and live in this loneliness? Nora was right, he couldn't keep living in memories. His heart couldn't stay cold forever. If he didn't open up, he wouldn't be able to give Nora a complete life, and he wouldn't be able to find joy in life again. Alan took a deep breath. Although the longing for Riley still hadn't faded, he knew now he had to learn how to love again, not just for himself, but for Nora too. A faint light within him showed that he could move forward, open his heart once more, even though the road ahead was full of challenges. Time passed, and Alan's work became smoother thanks to Hazel's support. The new assistant, with her excellent work skills and enthusiastic spirit, had helped him manage many complex issues, allowing him to focus on more important tasks. However, what Alan couldn't ignore was that Hazel wasn't only skilled, but also had an attractive appearance, with a sharp, beautiful face and remarkable confidence. As the days went by, Hazel began to approach Alan more proactively. She didn't hesitate to offer advice, support him in his work, and even started asking about his personal life. Their conversations no longer revolved solely around work, but began to slip into everyday matters. Alan realized he was no longer as stiff or cold as he had been before. One night, after a long business trip, when Alan returned to the hotel, he couldn't deny that the emotions between him and Hazel had crossed the boundary of work. Although somewhat confused and unsure, he couldn't resist what was happening in his heart. Hazel, with her natural charm, kept creating intimate moments. She would approach him, gazing into his eyes, as if no barriers existed between them. Alan, someone who had always kept a clear distance before, now felt that he couldn't control his emotions. Although he knew he could never replace Riley, Hazel's gentleness, the way she cared for him with every gesture, made him feel a comfort he hadn't found in a long time. "Oh, what?" Ellen smiled. "I was counting on you not having to fake it." He couldn't understand what he was doing, but it felt as if everything was happening naturally. Alan couldn't explain why he was falling so quickly, especially when his heart was still burdened with lingering pain. But perhaps, sometimes, love arrives without explanation, and maybe this was the moment for him to learn how to open his heart again. 3 months later, Hazel moved in with Alan and Nora. At first, she seemed to care about Nora, taking care of the family as a second mother, which gave Alan peace of mind. However, after a short time, Hazel's true nature began to show. She became selfish and cold, and even did things that made Mila worried. Mila, although unable to speak, always quietly observed and noticed Hazel's negative change. Alan, consumed with work and emotions, didn't realize the truth, still trusting in what Hazel portrayed. Since Hazel had moved in with Alan and Nora, Mila felt something was wrong. Although Hazel always appeared to care and take care of the family, there were moments when Mila couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She would often keep an eye on Hazel, watching her gestures, expressions, and actions, sensing a subtle change. One fateful day, as Alan and Nora went out, Mila was cleaning the kitchen when she accidentally overheard Hazel's phone conversation. She didn't know Mila was listening carefully to every word. Hazel picked up the phone and spoke to someone, her voice tense but confident, as if she was discussing a well-thought-out plan. "Are you ready?" Hazel asked, her voice full of determination. "Tonight, I'll do as we discussed. Alan will drink the tea I've prepared. I'll put the drug in it, and he won't have a chance to resist." On the other end of the line, Nicholas's voice came through, tinged with worry. "Hazel, are you sure? I don't want us to get into serious trouble if anything goes wrong. Alan isn't easy to deceive." Hazel scoffed, her voice turning cold. "He won't suspect a thing. I've planned everything. Just a little time, and it will all be over. Don't worry. After tonight, we'll have everything we want." Mila stood frozen, her heart pounding. Hazel and Nicholas's words echoed in her head. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Hazel, the one she thought cared for Alan, was plotting something so wicked. A cold chill ran down her spine, and she knew she had to act. She couldn't let Alan fall into her trap. Even if she had to do it alone, Mila knew she had to protect her family silently and from the shadows. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was warm, filled with laughter and conversation. Hazel had prepared an elaborate feast with delicious dishes and fine wine. She watched Alan and Nora intently, a smile on her face as if waiting for a special moment. Everyone appeared happy, but Mila, standing in the corner of the room, couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. She felt like a shadow, uneasy and afraid. Since Alan had walked in, she hadn't found the opportunity to warn him about the danger lurking, and now all she could do was silently watch, unable to do anything. The meal passed smoothly, but inside Mila, it felt as though a fire was burning. She knew that only a little time remained before Hazel's plan would be set in motion. As Alan and Nora's eyes shone with joy during the meal, Mila decided she could no longer hesitate. Stealthily, she wrote a note warning about Hazel's plot, the plan to poison Alan through the cup of tea tonight. The small piece of paper contained all the truth that Mila could not let Alan miss. Mila held the paper in her hand, trying to stay calm. She knew she had to act the moment Hazel was out of the room. And finally, that moment came. The clock struck 10 p.m., the meal concluded, and dessert was served. Cakes and tea. At that point, Mila realized she had no other choice. She approached Nora, her hands trembling, and handed the note to the girl, hoping she would help pass the message to Alan. Mila's heart pounded, sweat beaded on her forehead. She couldn't believe she was doing this, but she knew this was her last chance to save Alan. Nora, still innocent and trusting, looked at Mila like a dependable friend. Suddenly, the little girl spoke. "Dad, I want to take a walk in the garden. Could you come with me?" Alan smiled and nodded, but Hazel immediately intervened, her voice sounding irritated. "Nora, you're too young to be out there right now." But Nora wouldn't back down. She came up with a clever idea. Suddenly, she collapsed, pretending to faint right in front of everyone. Alan rushed over in panic, picked Nora up, and quickly carried her to the room. As he took care of the little girl, Nora whispered into his ear, "Dad, I need to tell you something, but not with Hazel here." The girl's whisper was like a lightning bolt that split the tense atmosphere. Alan felt something was wrong. His heart raced as if recognizing the danger that lurked. While everything around seemed to quiet down, Mila knew this was the pivotal moment. Now, everything depended on Nora and Alan's resolve. When only Alan and Nora were left in the room, the little girl gently handed Alan the warning note and whispered, "Papa, don't drink tea from that cup. The new mom put poison in it." Alan was surprised, but Nora's gaze made him realize that this was the truth. He took a deep breath, looked at his daughter, and nodded slightly. "Papa won't drink that tea, Nora. Thank you." With firm resolve, Alan held the note in his hand, preparing to face the truth. After leaving Nora's room, Alan walked into the living room. His demeanor remained calm, but inside, he felt a simmering desire for revenge. There was nothing else he could do except patiently wait for the right moment. Hazel, unaware of anything, had prepared 2 cups of hot tea, one for Alan and one for herself. She smiled brightly, holding the cup towards him with affectionate eyes. "Drink the tea, I've already prepared it," she said sweetly. Alan looked at her and smiled faintly. "Thank you, Hazel. But could you grab the fruit plate from the kitchen for me? I'm feeling a bit hungry." Hazel nodded without suspicion and left the room. At that moment, Alan quickly swapped his cup with hers, carefully placing the note between the cup and the fruit plate so that no one would notice. His heart was pounding, but he kept his demeanor calm, showing no sign of emotion. Moments later, Hazel returned with the fruit plate, completely unaware that she was holding a cup of tea laced with poison. She sat down, raised the cup to her lips, and began drinking. Alan simply watched, his eyes never leaving her. 1 minute passed, then 2, until suddenly Hazel stopped. Her face turned pale, and she began to cough violently, foaming at the mouth, before suddenly collapsing onto the floor. Alan remained unfazed, standing there with an emotionless expression. Hazel rolled around on the floor, her arms and legs convulsing, foam bubbling from her mouth like a frantic animal beyond help. The smell of tea and wine mixed in the air, but Alan stayed where he was, not moving. The revenge had been carried out, and now he was just waiting for the end of these evil plots. A few minutes later, Alan made one final kind gesture. He took Hazel to the hospital to have her stomach pumped, saving her from danger. Even though she had tried to harm him, Alan couldn't let the woman die because of her malice. When Hazel woke up in the hospital, she realized that her scheme had been exposed. A sense of fear and disappointment overwhelmed her, but she knew there was no point in filing a lawsuit, as she had created the plot herself. She could only blame herself for putting herself in such a humiliating position. Alan returned home, ignoring her. When he entered, he embraced Nora, tears streaming down his face from happiness and gratitude. "Thank you, Nora. You saved Papa." Nora pointed towards Mila and whispered, "It was Mila, Papa. She discovered it." Alan turned to look at Mila, his eyes filled with gratitude. He walked over to her and said, "Thank you, Mila. You saved our family." In the end, after all the storms and challenges, Alan realized that the person who had stood by him throughout it all was not the newcomers in his life, but Mila. The one who had quietly cared for the family and protected them in their most difficult times. Having been helped by Mila and saved from Hazel's plot, Alan no longer had any doubts about her honesty and sincere heart. Sometime later, Alan decided to propose to Mila. On a peaceful evening, under the warm glow of the yellow lights, Alan knelt before Mila and said, "Thank you for everything. I have lived too long in the shadow of the past. Now I realize that sincerity and love do not come from appearances or dazzling relationships. You are the only one who could bring me true happiness." Mila, with tears in her eyes, nodded and agreed to become Alan's wife, and from then on, they began a new life, a family full of love. Mila was not just a maid, but also a life partner, the mother of their daughter, walking alongside Alan on a new journey. Alan's story comes to a close, bringing a valuable lesson: never judge others by appearances. And sometimes, true sincerity and love come from those we least expect. Honesty, courage, and love will never fail those who deserve it. In life, we need to cherish those who are by our side, rather than seeking perfection in distant things, because simplicity and sincerity are the firm foundation for building a long-lasting, happy life.